In the austere aftermath of the Great War, the sporting public was ready to cherish a brash, colourful, controversial hero. Charley Paddock was the answer to that prayer. Not an obvious answer, since at 5 foot 7 inches and 170 pounds, he was scarcely the ideal shape for a world-beating sprinter, nor did his physical deficiencies end there.
He was examined after the 1920 Olympics by a famous French physician who declared that Paddock ran like a calf with two heads. He had curvature of the spine, his breathing was wrong, and his shoulders were incorrectly aligned. And so it was rather strange to see this creature performing so brilliantly on the track.
But perform he did, building his early reputation in California and confirming his promise in the Inter-Allied Games in Paris in 1919. He not only won 3 gold medals, he was also knighted by the King of Montenegro for his services to sprinting. At the age of 19, he had become Sir Charley of Montenegro. His campaign of self-promotion was firmly underway. That campaign was to include some outrageous accessories: silk running shorts, multicolored tracksuits, deerskin shoes. But his trump card was the Paddock leap.
He took off 12 to 16 feet away from the finish, because in those days there were no photo finishes. So if you could catch the judge's eyes, you would get the decision over another sprinter who was actually ahead of you.
In fact, it was little more than a gimmick. But along with the garish outfits and a growing reputation as a rebel against athletics authority, it set people talking. And the more they talked, the happier was Charley Paddock. But Paddock was not a happy man when the Americans set sail from New York for the 1920 Games in Antwerp. The SS Princess Matoika was a converted army ship with few of the comforts expected by the athletes. When it was learned that their quarters in Antwerp were even more basic, Paddock helped launch the mutiny on the Matoika. This petition outlined their complaints, but despite assurances, living conditions were poor when they reached Antwerp. Paddock had had enough. He fixed up an apartment of his own close to the stadium where he could sleep and eat in comfort. He was in a happier mood as the Games opened. The Olympic title was an essential stage in Paddock's long-term planning, but he was faced with formidable opposition, particularly from his 3 fellow Americans, Lauren Murchison, Maurice Kirksey, and Jackson Schultz. Before the race, he swallowed a glass of sherry and a raw egg to warm himself, but his Olympic dream seemed to have died 30 meters from the tape when Kirksey led the field. With a desperate effort, Paddock drew level, then made his winning leap for the line. Years later, in a book modestly entitled The Fastest Human, he described the final, famous half-second of the race. I saw the thin white string stretching to breaking point in front of me. I sprang forward in a final jump for the tape. Just as my feet left the ground, Kirksey turned his head toward me, and for a single instant lost his forward drive. The summary was perfect. Kirksey's head turn cost him the race. The gold medal was Paddock's, and the future was full of dazzling possibilities. For a time he traveled. He wrote a stream of articles and delivered 100 lectures. Then he returned to the track and broke world records for 100 meters and 220 yards. So hungry was Paddock for records that he traveled the world and invented new distances, and duly claimed world records for them all. But his appetite for athletics was fading, and it was only the persuasive power of his close boyhood friend, the movie idol Douglas Fairbanks, which saw him journey to Paris in 1924 to defend his Olympic sprint title. One of his traveling companions was a young Douglas Fairbanks Jr.
My mother and I were on our way to Paris on the same ship as most of the American team, including Johnny Weissmuller. But I remember working out with them on board the ship and having a sort of young boys hero worship for all the great champions. And then when we landed on the other side, they used to let me work out with them. Of course, Charley would train, he and Murchison would train every day for the 100-yard dash, and they'd give me a 60-yard head start and still beat me.
But there were rather more formidable opponents in store for Paddock in the 1924 Olympics, and he finished a disappointing 5th in the 100 meters to a young Englishman named Harold Abrahams. Charley relaxed for the rest of the games in the exotic company of Mary Pickford and Maurice Chevalier, although he made a brief return to the Olympic track to take the silver medal at 200 meters behind Jackson Schultz. At the suggestion of de Coubertin, he undertook a world tour to spread the gospel of track and field, but Fairbanks convinced him that his future lay in movies. In 1926, he made a 5-reel silent picture with one of Paramount's top stars, Bebe Daniels. The rumors around Hollywood insisted that the couple were more than just good friends, and the extrovert Charley did little to discourage speculation. But even while he enjoyed the headlines, he was certain that he had one great race left in him. He delivered it in May 1926, when he destroyed the world 100 yards record with 9.5 seconds. That run persuaded him to undertake his third Olympics in Amsterdam in 1928. But with stories of amateurism and expense fiddling levelled at him, he was far beyond his best, and he departed in the 200 meters semi-finals. By now, the celebrity lifestyle was his second nature. He first became involved in journalism, then increasingly in politics, while enjoying family life just outside Los Angeles at the same time. With America's entry into World War II, he enlisted in the Marines. They made him a morale officer, and it was in this capacity, on the final leg of a tour, that Charley Paddock, the fastest man on Earth, was killed in a plane crash in Alaska in July 1943. Charley Paddock was perhaps the most flamboyant of all the Olympic sprint champions, yet today he is largely forgotten. By contrast, the prickly, determined Englishman destined to succeed him as the fastest man on Earth is widely remembered more than half a century later.